No, it will be soft focus because
Can I sit down on one of the lower chairs if people still see me?
you can absolutely. I'll just double check. Hello to everybody who's entering the Zoom room, and hello to people here in real life. We're just reorganising. Did you want to grab chairs? Just reorganising our space. Where it's a very cold night in Brisbane, and so we're inside. And if you guys want to move even closer to the computer, you're welcome to after I move away, because it's the closer you are, the clearer you are. But welcome to the people who have just joined us, and welcome to the people who are here in real life. For the people who are here on Zoom, if you'll be on silent for the duration of the event, but if you do have any questions, you can use the chat function to ask questions, and that will be texted to me, and I'll be able to pass that along to everyone. So please feel free to use the chat function to ask questions, and anyone in real life will be able to just ask questions themselves. So I'd like to just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on in this area, the Yagara and the Turrbal people. I'd like to pay my deepest respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any other elders who are here in real life or virtually. So welcome to you, and my respects as well. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. We are on storytelling land that has a history 60,000 years old and longer. And so we really are very privileged to be telling stories on this land still today. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our guests tonight. In conversation with Ambrosia, we have Liz Maguire, who is an English teacher, reader, and sometime writer from Brisbane. She and Ambrosia met in Central Australia at the Royal Antediluvian Ilpapa Brown Water Sailing Club Regatta, when Ambrosia came to the rescue of Liz's younger daughter. Ambrosia has shared her gentle wisdom and survival skills with the grateful Liz many times since. We all need a Liz in our life, I think. And of course, Ambrosia Jones, who's an artist, healer and writer who works in watercolour, ceramics, felt, photography, scent, music and any other medium she puts her hands on. She specialises in what she calls mystical realism, and her art is a reflection of how she sees and interacts with the world around her. So now we will pass over to our guests, and if you do feel like moving a little closer, if you're framed well, we'll be able to begin our event. Fantastic. Wonderful.
So, hi Ambrosia, and hi to everyone who's tuning in from far away. I have been
gentle wisdom.
Gentle wisdom. It really is sometimes ferocious wisdom, but generally gentle.
You might need to explain about that rescuing thing too, and that the regatta was actually in the middle of the desert, and the water was maybe knee high at the deepest.
I know, and full of rusty nails. So yeah, we had gone to a very unusual sailing event where people kind of improvise watercraft out of, what was the name of Mr. Curly's original form? He was
it was a big water tank.
Agricultural water tank or something. Yeah. So Ambrosia was sort of piloting this giant pink, learning-inspired, painted, majestic kind of barge. And my daughter Zara had been kind of mesmerised by it, and she stood on a nail while looking at it and burst into tears. And Ambrosia kind of scooped her up and said, you know, do you want to have a ride in Mr. Curly? And saved her. She immediately went from, you know, heartbreak to delight. And we still have photos that we look at at the moment. It was amazing.
It was a pretty cool event out in the desert too.
It was, yeah. And it only happens when the clay pans flood. So it's not reliable. And it's either the 8th or the 9th, I think, that we were at. And by now they're probably up to 15, hopefully, after all the rain. So Ambrosia and I would see each other intermittently in Alice, because you would be off working remotely. And when we first met, you had been, I think, in Alice but not very long. And I think I found that when I was in that part of the world, I found myself feeling quite strong emotions, which brought up a lot of, I guess, pain in some cases. You'd be struck by the beauty of the landscape and you'd suddenly feel moved in ways that would access deeper memories. And I feel like you were kind of going through that as well. Would you say that's true?
Well, I'd run away to the desert basically and headlong into a disastrous love affair. It's a way of dealing with losing Dan. So
Yeah.
I was pretty much emotional all the time at that stage.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that you were picking up on, because you're quite an empathetic person, and is it mystical realism?
Mm-hmm.
Is a really perfect way to describe the way you relate to people. I feel that there is a real earthiness to everything that you do and a real truth to it, but it's kind of peppered by a very, I don't want to say spooky because that's devaluing it. That's what I said before.
Zany?
A little bit.
Yep.
Yeah. And I remember it always felt like there was a whole lot of energy around when you were kind of with us wherever we were. Yeah. So because you stayed with us for a few days as well. And I remember being aware of parts of the house that I hadn't really noticed. And I don't know whether that was because you were there, kind of opening up my eyes to things.
Okay.
Yeah. But I feel as though with the journal, can we move on to talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, we will.
But as I read the introduction, in which you talk about, I guess, how insane some of our culture is, and you talk about how there are saner cultures that know how to relate to their feelings in a more honest way than maybe we're allowed to do in our kind of current setup. Parameters. Yeah. And I remember being very grateful for you at that time because you seem to be able to acknowledge and give legitimacy to all of the feelings that people have, whether they're socially acceptable or not.
Like saying it's perfectly normal to want to kill your kids.
Yes. That was really helpful. But also presenting them in a really, you made me see my children differently as well.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Because you see them as people.
Well, you've got really cool kids.
Sometimes. Yeah, thank you for that. And so when I was reading that acknowledgement that, we need a bit more sanity, and whether or not it's a sort of, I want to say mediated sanity, where you have to kind of negotiate your feelings with a specialist, when you do talk about Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, but I feel as though, in a way, your journal helps us in that mediated way, if we were to kind of trust our thoughts to that page, because it is such a beautiful book. Yeah. Then we would be able to kind of feel moved through, but in a very organic way, shall we say, So I was wondering, did you start to write that book at that time in Central Australia? Or?
No, I didn't start writing the book until about a year and a half ago, I think. I was initially approached by one of the editors from Blue Angel, by Lila, because she had seen some of my paintings online on Facebook.
Oh, okay.
Because I used to write for her years ago in one of the magazines that she used to run.
Yeah.
And she forwarded some of my paintings to the publisher of Blue Angel.
So it started from the art.
Tony Solano, yeah.
Yeah.
And he liked them, and so they got back to me and said, would you like to do a project with us? And then I've had to sort of sit down and think about what could I even write about? How could I use these paintings? What could I do? And in the end, what I ended up writing was not what I'd originally planned at all, but it's actually the story of how the paintings came to be, because they were all, I started painting after Dan died, basically as a way to stay sane, or to get back to being sane again, because I needed to have an outlet for everything that I was feeling, and I didn't have one because people didn't want to talk to me about what I was feeling, and I had no one else to talk to, so I sat down and put it into the paintings and into the paper, and that's how it came about. And so what I ended up doing was writing what I would have liked to have while I was grieving, what could have helped me while I was grieving. So it's sort of telling the story of how these paintings came about, trying to sort of give somebody else a little bit of a lifeline or a pathway if they're going through something similar about this. This is how you might be able to get through it. And asking the kind of questions I really wish somebody had asked me at the time.
Like, have you had a shower?
Yeah.
Have you eaten?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I spent weeks, the first months literally just went into such a blur. I was living on my own with my eldest daughter, and I was working at the time too, and I would get up in the morning and go to work and come home and drink basically until the pain was enough so I could go back to sleep again, and then get up in the morning and do it again. And the whole act of getting up in the morning and having a shower and having something to eat just seemed impossible for such a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what grief does to you. You just feel so overwhelmed that mundane everyday things just seem really impossible.
Yeah.
And that's why I made that the beginning of each chapter, and I had to argue with the publisher about that too, and go back and say, no, I want this in front of every single chapter because it's really, really important. Just
the key.
Yeah.
If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, have you had something to eat?
Yeah.
So I noticed one of the symbols is like a nautilus shell or a snail, and I was wondering what that kind of resonance it might have for you at that time, whether it was protection or retreat.
I'm just really obsessed with spirals. They seem to turn up in almost everything I paint.
Yeah.
It's a very old. I mean, I don't paint them because of their deep symbolic meaning, just because I really, really like them. I've got this real thing about shells and about spirals, and so I've painted them and drawn them over and over and over again. But life does have a tendency to go that way, you know. There's an old teaching within paganism too, but it's learning is actually a spiral thing. It's not something which goes from here to there. You go around in spirals and you revisit the same thing.
That's an educational thing.
Yeah. And you revisit it over and over and over again until you've actually worked it out.
Yeah.
And every time you revisit it, you see it in a different angle and a different light.
Yeah.
And snails are really like that. It's sort of this repetitious pattern.
They keep meeting themselves on the way around.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, because it is, I mean, it's one of those sort of sacred geometries as well, isn't it? You know, the Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah. I'm glad you remember that. I'd forgotten again.
So with the journal, my first feeling when I picked it up was how utterly beautiful it is.
Thank you.
And reading it when you describe it as a gift for the people who happen to have it in their hands, I feel is a very true way of speaking about it. And I remember the first moment I kind of touched it, I thought, I think I'd be too frightened to write in it because it's so utterly beautiful. Can I maybe show some people? Okay, Chrissy. Yeah, do you want to maybe show? It feels incredibly tactile, like a buttery kind of beautiful cover. And all of the pages are really vibrantly coloured and like a very soft kind of buff. And that would be it's so beautiful that I don't think I don't know how I would get the courage to start writing in it.
Yeah, I had a long discussion with Leila and with the publishers about that too, because I actually wanted it to be a lot scruffier.
Okay.
For exactly that reason.
If it was mine, it would be scruffy quickly.
Yeah.
But still that moment, like, do you have advice about that, taking the plunge on the first?
Well, that's why I was really, really glad that they've sort of included some of my really little scribbly drawing sort of things at the top of the page to sort of get you started. You know,
Okay.
I've written in the journal to please scribble over the top.
Yeah.
To scribble over the paintings and stick your own things and stuff in it. It's a hard one. I mean, blank pages are terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
And these aren't blank, right?
Yeah.
They were blank for you, but you've taken the first step. They're just utterly beautiful.
Well, I purposely gave Blue Angel a whole heap of my actual scribbly drawings to include, you know, things like this. This is actually the very first page. That you can see it. Oops, that picture up in the top there. That one there. That's the very first one I ever did. When I was living in Nimbin at the time, this was a few months after Dan had died, and I was sitting in a cafe, and I decided I needed to start drawing just to have something to do. And I found this pattern on the internet and sat down and copied it, and then sat in the cafe and drew this tiny little square and started filling it in with that pattern and with a little bit of colour. And that was as much as I could do
It's
at
the
the time.
genesis. Yeah.
And so each one of these, this is one day sitting in Nimbin in a cafe for about 2 hours, basically working on just a tiny little drawing. And just for that short time, all of the stuff in my head would actually stop and I could focus on something else.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, it's a really organic process, it feels like.
Yeah.
A lot of your,
Okay,
the artwork feels very elemental, I suppose. This one I loved, the image of the earth and the trees and the sunset.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites too. But
Yeah.
that was also a few years down the track.
Yeah. And it's sort of, I was wondering about the butterflies and the dragonflies and all these little winged creatures that you...
Well, that particular butterfly, it's actually a moth, and it's a copy of one which lives out in the desert. When I was working out at Mutijulu, out at Uluru, out in the Aboriginal community out there, there's a really, really amazing cultural centre, which amongst other things also has these two moths, preserved moths pinned up in a picture on the wall. And so I sat there for about an hour and drew them.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I guess that's also, the life cycle, if you look at it from a scientific perspective, of, the sort of nebulous, the caterpillar, the final taking flight.
And also the moths are also their spirit messages in Aboriginal culture too.
Really?
So.
Yeah. And that's what another thing you talk about is being able to find joy in these little happenings that come past you. And they come for a reason, and they're everywhere, these beautiful insects that we're able to interact with. So would you have any advice for someone who finds themselves with this book and with the need to start using it? Because you the way you present it is like you start at the beginning and you kind of move through, and it does seem to follow that pattern of grief, guilt, the kind of what if I had not done these things. Is there a way would you suggest, can you start at another part of the book if you were to use it out of order?
Like.
Yeah. Because I know
there's the actual paintings for the moths there.
That's beautiful. Really gorgeous.
Yeah, desert moths.
And so do you feel like you completed this in your head while you were putting it all on paper? Would you say you went through all of the stages?
Well, I did, because I went through it all again as I was writing. It was literally going through everything that I'd actually felt and all of the pain that I'd been feeling and all of the loneliness and all of the just feeling so completely and utterly lost. So it was writing was also a way for me to heal a bit more of that too. Yeah.
And you're inviting that shared experience. Yeah. Do you think that you might come back to it another time, talking about the spiral, that once you've completed it, you can actually return to it, 2 or 3 years later and either add to it or feel as if you don't need to add any more, that the grief has concluded?
Oh, I don't think it ever really concludes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really want to add more to the book. I mean, I purposely tried to put enough of my own story into it to make it relatable for people, but I didn't want to tell them what they had to feel or what they had to do.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to set it up basically so that it was a space for them, and the focus was on the questions really rather than on my journey. My journey is only there for me to be able to say, okay, this is how I felt. So I understand how you're feeling, and it's normal. It's normal to feel absolutely terrible. It's normal for the pain to go on for a long time. It's normal to feel completely and utterly lost. Yeah. But I wanted to create something which was really just for other people to use rather than just about me. Yes. Yeah.
And I very much, I felt that I had questions, I found that I really wanted to know more about Dan.
Okay.
Having read the little references to him, he sounds like a really fascinating person.
He was. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. So what would he say about the book, do you think?
I think he'd be very proud of it, because he was always very proud of everything I did. He was always incredibly supportive of anything that I did.
Mm.
It was one of the things I loved about it.
Yeah.
I think it was pretty much that, basically looking over my shoulder the whole time, poking me about it, because he's done that all the way through.
Yeah.
Never really went away.
Yeah.
And so he's been there sort of doing that way. Come on, get it together.
That's good.
And he'd say, let's have a drink and celebrate.
I know. And that's the thing. That
Probably too much too.
Well, it really is something to be very, very proud of. You know, it is a real, and I've never seen anything like it. I've seen similar ideas with different processes of life, but I've never seen one that deals with heartbreak in such an accessible and incredibly sensitive, but really down to earth way, you know, mystically realistic. Yeah, so I thought perhaps we could see if you would like to ask any questions of Ambrosia or make any comments about the book yourselves. I know you're probably very familiar with it. Have you had a good look? Yeah.
I'd like to ask if you've actually test run it on anybody. So have you given it to someone to use, and how was that experience?
Well, I've only had the book in my hands for about a week and a half, and I sent off most of the copies that I had to people who either encouraged me along the way, but the most important one was one which I sent to a very old friend of mine who lost his wife. Shortly after I actually started writing the book, I was originally talking to her about writing a book with her about healing. And so I sent him a copy of this, and he got back to me yesterday saying that he'd been crying ever since he got it, which in a good way. So, and I think that's probably the biggest compliment I could have got. That just made writing the book totally worthwhile, even if nothing else happens. If I never sell any other copies, that it touched him. Yeah,
it's really.
And apart from that, I just have to wait and see. All I can do as a writer is just basically, okay, well, this is what I think might help. I hope it helps.
We do see workbooks come through here for lots of different kind of things, but I haven't seen one specifically for this area yet. So I think that doesn't seem to be anything quite like it out there. And I reckon there would be a need for people who don't know how to get through their own grief.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's what I found too. Being a real bookhead, one of the first things I did was look around and try and find books to help me through, and I couldn't find anything. And most of the stuff I did find was also quite insipid. It's probably the best way I could put it. There's most of the books on grief focus. They all sound really sweet and nice. It's all terribly supportive and really lovely, and of course you'll get through this. And whereas in actual fact, a lot of people don't. I used to work as a psych nurse in a psych ward, and I had a lot of patients who'd lost somebody they were very, very close to, who never got over it, who would basically just an absolute mess for the rest of their lives, who drank themselves into the ground or took other drugs or ended up committing suicide, because not everybody gets over it. A lot of people don't. And it's messy and it's painful. And
That's great. It's great you put that down.
It is, yeah.
I think one of the things I like about it most is the fact that it's not telling you this is the way you must go. This is what you must be feeling, and this is the way you must. It's not telling you to do that. It's not a textbook where you've got to do A, B, C, D to get through it. So, okay, this is some of the things you may be experiencing. You might be really angry and think, oh my God, I'm not allowed to be angry at somebody who's passed off.
yeah.
But as she used as an example, 1 o'clock in the morning, going out in the street of the backyard and screaming out at the top of her lungs,
That's right.
her anger. That was what she was feeling.
Yeah.
It was part of her belief system. And it worked for her. Maybe it'll work for you if you're feeling the same way. You don't have to bottle some of these things up that society says you're not supposed to feel.
That's right.
Or you're not supposed to express. That's what I like about the book. It's saying, feel free to express what you're feeling, but obviously don't go hurting other people while you're doing it.
Yeah, because that is an aspect of it that, you know, you're kind of unaware in some ways of how you are in the world when you're grieving, you know, and this sort of acknowledges the parameters of that experience a little bit, you know, that it is really unpredictable. It is you know, and I mean, I don't know if it's obvious, but I don't feel that I've ever lost anyone that has completely, you know, unmoored me. I've been very lucky in my life so far. But as I was reading it, I was thinking about other forms of grief. It doesn't have, as you say, it doesn't have to be brokenheartedness from the death of a person. And I know at the moment we're sort of losing a family member to dementia. And, you know, in some ways that sort of loss is a very slow, you're almost losing them. You're going through the grief as they're, you know, as they're alive. And so parts of the book spoke to me in that way. And I feel like it doesn't have to be brought on by some precipitous event. You know, it can almost be a companion to a gradual heartbreak.
Sometimes that can even be worse because you're watching it happen by degree, and there's nothing you can do to stop it.
Yeah, nothing.
A question from online as well. So Roxanne has asked, did you show it to others in the family before you brought it out? And how was that? Because you're putting yourself out on the line in this book. So did you feel like you had to show it to others in the family before you put it out?
Actually, Roxy, I didn't really show it to anybody. I think I showed it to Sid. I showed it to my partner, but I didn't show it to anybody else. And I particularly didn't show it to my kids while I was writing it. And I think that was also one of the hardest things about the grieving process altogether for me, is that my kids were used to always turning to me when they were in pain and when they needed something. And when Dan died, they turned to me and I had absolutely nothing left to give them. And it was horrendous. And I know it was really, really hard for the kids, but it also left me feeling incredibly guilty. And I literally ran away for a few years too. And so while I was writing the book, part of what I've also done with what I've put into that too, it's also my way of finally trying to explain to the kids a little bit what I was feeling and what was happening and why I wasn't there and why I couldn't help them. So, and so I'm still sitting back, and my youngest daughter has read that. I think my middle daughter hasn't got a copy yet, and my eldest daughter hasn't read it yet either. So I'm still waiting to see what they actually think.
When they put the kid gloves on.
Yeah,
it's a very hard process to experience differently too. If they had a different relationship with, you know, with Dan, or, you know, if they suddenly feel the absence of not just him but you.
Yeah.
You know,
they lost both of their parents at the same time, and I was really aware of it too. Yeah, and I guess that's something which we don't really talk about, which probably happens in a lot of families too. Because if someone loses their partner, basically you can write them off for at least the next few years. But in most cases, if they have kids, they still have to go on functioning, and they have to somehow still be a parent, and it doesn't leave any space for their own grief.
Yeah, so it's suppressed.
Has to be,
in a way. So this is kind of a gentle method to kind of gradually extract.
Well, I don't know if it's gentle because it can be really full on. Sometimes you can sit down and write something and it can be really quite confronting what can actually come out when you start.
That's an interesting one. Maybe you need a companion volume for when you need to really go into those darker feelings about, because I feel like a lot of this journal ends on a very hopeful, like each cycle of it seems to end with hope, you know, with a positive, even though you warn against that at the beginning. You say, you know, in a lot of funerals we have this celebration of life, kind of almost forced gaiety at a funeral, whereas maybe we really do want to give over to the full grief. Yeah.
One more question online as well from Ashley. Are you hoping to create other grief-related resources for people, or is this the one you wanted to do and that's it?
Well, if people do find the book useful and if it does spread, I'm thinking that I'm probably going to have to find a way to set up some kind of support system. What I'm thinking might be the most useful one would be to set up some kind of group where people can talk to each other. Because I don't think it's going to be useful for me to sit there as the expert giving people advice. But if I can find some way of providing a forum where people can share their grief with each other,
Yeah.
that I think would be very good.
And there is so much grief in our current climate, you know.
Yeah.
People have lost so much. There is so much brokenheartedness that I've personally seen.
Yeah.
Let alone, you know, the stuff that we haven't heard from. There was a question.
I'd love to say this. I like to skim through it and really, you know, being a fellow artist, I think I really like the art because of the, I think the depth and the organic nature of it. And I think actually this is so topical right now because we have come to a huge crisis point, even though we find it wounded of where we are on the planet and what we're losing of the planet. And the other day I heard David Attenborough says we lose about 50,000 species per year.
Which is just unimaginable, isn't it?
So I think your illustrations as well with, you know, with nature is also really quite relevant to this with climate grief. You know, Greta Thunberg talks of climate grief. So it goes from personal planetary and it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
That's very true. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience here or online?
Just, I think there's someone just dropped out and is coming back in. I'll just quickly.
Any other questions from people here? Or if people online have any questions, feel free to send them now, and Ewan will send them through to me.
Is there a part of the book that you think is more important than the other parts?
I think the most important bit is going to be whatever people write in it, to be honest.
Are you interested in people sharing that with you? Is there a way of them sharing their own kind of what they do with your book? Because that would be fascinating.
That would be amazing.
I'm open to suggestions. It would be wonderful, yeah. I mean, I'm so new to this whole thing because I hadn't planned any of it at all, from writing the book to it being published. So
It can take on a life of its own now. Yeah. So if you were to set up a moderated space for people to, you know, just
do it together.
do it and travel that road. That's a great idea.
that'd be a good thing.
Yeah. So was there anything else that you wanted to add about how long people should maybe spend? It's as long as they want to spend doing it, isn't it?
Well,
how long did it take you to write? Did you say 1.5 years? Yeah. Because I can imagine if I was to embark on that, it would take me as long, if not longer, to feel that I'd completed.
but I mean, that's just the writing, the paintings themselves. That's, God, when did Dan die? 7 or 8 years, I think.
Yeah. And he's in all of those artworks somewhere. Yeah. Well, it's a really phenomenal gift, as you say, to anyone who picks it up. I feel I do feel it's a gentle kind of inducement to people to acknowledge the heartbreak that they can be quite shocked by. I know that it comes as a great surprise to a lot of people that I've seen. They can't quite grasp the enormity of their feelings, and this is like it's almost like a container for them to put all of it into, like a safe space, as you say. You know. So I do hope to see that shared experience that people can.
Oh, have to give me some suggestions about how that could be set up.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, maybe Avid can put a little slot on their website for it to go. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Have a lot of say in the formatting of the book or the viewing? Should we have more of that in this?
I think it was pretty mixed. I had no idea what I was doing when I started out, because Blue Angel had approached me and I hadn't had any plans to write the book, and I'd never written a book. And so I wandered in pretty blind and didn't even know what paintings to use or what to suggest. Towards the end, once it had all been done, then I could see things I wanted to have differently, and that's when we started negotiating about how to change things too. And the biggest negotiation we actually had was around the front cover, because I didn't want to have something that pretty on the front cover. I wanted to have something fun, darker. I actually took them. They suggested a completely different painting, which I vetoed, and I sent them. They wanted to use this one as the front cover, and I wouldn't let them because I said it's way too pretty, and it's actually also one which I painted right at the end as part of my own healing process when Sid and I got together, and so it was, to me, that's more a love story than it was really not quite appropriate for somebody with a broken heart looking for a book. And so I actually took that painting, tore it up, photographed it torn up, and said, okay, you can put that on the cover, you know, when you really did with a broken heart. And they didn't think that was quite appropriate. They wanted something a little bit softer, which would convey a gentler message to the reader, and we compromised on this one. So it was an interesting process with me because, I mean, Leela, the editor, and Tony Solano, the publisher of Blue Angel, have been in this business for a really, really long time, and so they know what they're doing. And I think they've done an absolutely amazing job of how they've actually taken all of my jumbled thoughts and put it into something really quite stunningly beautiful. I mean, now when I hold it, it's like looking at a book which somebody else had written almost. It's, yeah.
You do. It's yours.
There is another question from Roxanne, actually. Do the words lead to the images, or do the images lead to the words?
Well, the images definitely led to the words, because I'd done all of the images way before I started writing. So.
Can you read one small part, do you think?
Which bit do you want me to read?
I was really struck in the first section when you talk about the descriptions of different kinds of loss that this might apply to. So if you can perhaps just read as much of this as you feel you can get through.
So many things can break our hearts. Relationships break up, long-term friendships explode and dissolve. Death can take a friend, a parent, a partner, or a child, and the loss breaks something in us. A vital part of ourselves dies when we lose someone we love. Our hearts crack open, revealing a gaping emptiness where there used to be feelings of love, safety, and connection. Our heart is one of the hardest things to heal because we don't talk about it. Our busy lives don't leave us space to grieve, to express the pain we feel, nor reconcile the loneliness. Yet so many of us stagger on, carrying the vast weight of our grief with us, unexpressed and unhealed. In older, kinder times, people were graced with a year of mourning after losing a loved one. Wearing black was a signal to those around you that you were in a dark state and could not be expected to behave or cope as you normally would. This gave the grieving person space to be miserable in peace and quiet. Many saner cultures have rituals that allow for the expression of grief, such as paid wailers at funerals, the rending of clothes, or the ritual cutting of hair or the skin. There are funeral rites that go on for months instead of the puny one-off things we do in Western society. In all cultures, just as in ours, after the appropriate time of mourning is deemed over, we are expected to go back to our normal lives, and it doesn't work.
That was incredibly, I thought it really saw something that we don't even know how to deal with. And so this feels like a guidebook to what happens next, you know. So yeah. I hope that I don't need this book soon, but I really feel like when I do, I know exactly what to do, you know. It's kind of like something to hold on to, and it's the right size to take it with you if you need to. Yeah. And as I read it, I could imagine, even if you use it as a guide, but you don't actually put pen on those beautiful pages, the process itself is incredibly valuable. So I feel like it's something that we should all have in an emergency kit at our houses, just in case.
First aid for broken hearts.
That's right. I know. Yeah, it's really special.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone who's joined us on the Zoom event. We are going to end our Zoom event there, I think. And the people here can still mill around and have a chat if you do want a copy of the book. Also on Zoom, if you do want a copy of the book, make sure that you order it from their website, and we can get that to you as soon as you need it. So thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Chrissy.
See you later, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Leave.